Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alex Kapitko, joined by my buddy Drew Nepley.
Hello,
This
hello.
Week, hey Drew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I was sick earlier this week, but now I'm on the recovery.
That's good. Yeah, man, it is literally raining cats and dogs. I'm sitting here in Madrid, and all I can hear is just rain outside. It's one of those days where you just don't even want to leave the house at all. So I figure it's a perfect day to dive into kind of a discussion on back channel diplomacy. It's
Right.
a topic that I think we've heard mentioned, but it hasn't really been clarified what this is. I mean, with all the quid pro quo talk involving Trump and the impeachment inquiry, Rudy Giuliani's name, Ukraine, I think it's interesting to maybe take a step back from the quid pro quo side and talk about back channel diplomacy. And I don't know if you want to maybe kind of walk us through what that actually is.
Yeah, back channel diplomacy is like diplomacy by that we've used in the United States. That's like outside of the public eye, maybe not necessarily in the regular channels of like the State Department or something. Sometimes it is, but it's just like outside the public eye and kind of kept secret. And and it's nothing new really. So that's the thing I've been figuring out is that back channel diplomacy has been used many times by various White Houses for various reasons. But there's a couple different caveats as to why this new back channel diplomacy than when you hear about Rudy Giuliani with Ukraine, why this one is different and why it's being treated differently and looked at differently. We'll get into that in a bit, but yeah, back channel diplomacy is really like you have your open diplomacy that you go to you're on TV, you have the media, you're shaking hands with the foreign leaders, but then the back channel is what happens kind of behind closed doors and usually with informal people involved that are just trusted by the White House, but not necessarily part of the main State Department or official White House title, stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it's very true, and I got this out of the US Naval War College, but they basically say backchannel diplomacy refers to unofficial but direct high-level communications that bypass formal channels. And I think that's a really good sentence. Just wrapping up in general what this is. And I think you touched on it well. Is that this is something that is not new. The Economist had an interesting piece last week about shadow diplomacy, as they called it, and basically they talk about how there are three times when this is used by past administrations, and they say the first is to rely on an especially trustworthy aide, which is kind of interesting. And they use the example of when FDR used Cordell. No, sorry, when FDR used Harry Hopkins, who was a
Right.
shrewd advisor to FDR and was not actual Cordell Hull, who was the Secretary of State, but he helped broker a lot of discussions between Russia and the United States, along with Winston Churchill as well. And they also used John F. Kennedy using his brother Robert Kennedy later on in this same light, where Robert Kennedy was working for the Justice Department, but he was helping broker discussions between Cuba, Russia, and the United States during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And actually, arguably, they say it was these back channels that helped avert the crisis. And the second one they highlight is a second standard use of back channel is to hold exploratory talks that could easily blow up. And Obama used this during the Iran deal,
Right.
in which he used high level State Department officials working under Hillary Clinton at the time, because if anything blew up in his face, it would not look good if the president was involved in that. And sorry, just real fast. The third one is then what when you're working with an adversary, which is what Richard Nixon, for example, did
It's Henry
when they
Kissinger.
opened up China. Exactly. Yeah, they used Henry Kissinger to do it to kind of keep the president out of the light, and they used a lot of back channels, talking to Mao, talking to the Romanian dictator at the time, and Charles de Gaulle in France. And it led eventually to being able to open up relations with China and the U.S. And so basically, my point is that this happens quite frequently throughout especially the last 20, 30 years, I would say. But just the big difference is that the Economist worries that there's a darker reason for Trump circumventing direct channels, and it's to break the law. And so I think that's what I kind of want to discuss on here is that this happens, but if Trump's motives are different, that could be the scary part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. NPR had an interview with a oh shoot, what's his name? I forget. I need to pull it up. But basically, they were talking with a diplomat who is retired in 2017, and he was talking about how he understood that back channels were nothing new. And okay, here it is. It's Ambassador Daniel Freed, who's spent 40 years at the State Department focused on Europe and Russia. So Freed was talking about how, like we would talk about, back channels are nothing new, but the idea of back channels is it promotes U.S. interests. It promotes, the interest of the United States as a whole. And so, like Obama with the Iran deal, you might not agree with the policy being promoted by the back channel, but it's still with the intent of benefiting the entire United States, right? So you could argue the policy all you want, but it's still with the intent of the United States foreign policy as a whole. Whereas Freed then makes a distinction. What we're seeing today with Giuliani is not in the interest of the United States, but in interest of the president personally, and that's where we're having the difference from the precedents we've seen in the past and today. Giuliani was a back channel to benefit Trump and only Trump, and not necessarily to benefit like U.S. interests, because like you mentioned, it could, it's still up for debate, but it looks like some of the stuff that happened could have been illegal, especially going against where and Freed talks about how Yovanovitch was kicked out, how he's never seen it happen where a back channel has led to like the United States basically getting played by foreign actors. Who he believes the motives are bad. And so I think that's the big distinction is what is the purpose of the back channel? And Trump, Trump has used back channels before in his administration with Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner was a back channel to Russia in 2017, as well as a back channel to the Saudi Arabians, continuously. And so, and there was a lot of questions about that as well. Is Kushner's back channel to Russia, is that promoting U.S. foreign policy, or is he kind of more representing his father, the real estate mogul? So, there's some pretty important distinctions with these current back channels that are in the news.
Interesting. Yeah, I also read that same PBS article, and I think it's a valid point to really look at it, because it's true. A lot of the past issues that we've talked about already related now to this Giuliani scandal, I guess you could call it, is there is a large difference, and I think you summed it up well, is like in the past, back channels have been used by presidents as a way to kind of further American policy in a general sense. You know what I mean? Like there's usually a specific outcome on the other side. But in this case, it almost seems like the opposite is happening, where you kind of have Giuliani and Lev and Igor and the rest of the crew kind of running around Ukraine, kind of taking advantage of presidential authority to further not only their pockets, but potentially the Trump the Trump Foundation as well, and that to me is kind of disturbing a little bit. CNN just reported recently that Giuliani privately sought hundreds of thousands of dollars in businesses from Ukrainian officials. One proposal, which I think is just insane, was that in February, it involved the Ukrainian Ministry of Justice, where Giuliani was talking with them to help them find stolen money in return for a $300,000 payment. And the funny thing is this: there's just no way you could relate that to furthering American diplomatic actions.
Right.
I don't like helping them find this lost money in exchange for furthering, Giuliani's consulting firm. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound too far into helping the United States.
No, that has nothing.
So it's interesting.
That has nothing to do with like promoting democracy in Ukraine versus Russian influence. Like, yeah, it's. Yeah, that sounds like he's trying to line his own pockets. I mean, what happened? He like butt dialed a reporter and he overheard him, saying that we need like 400 more grand or something because they were out of money. And it sounds like Giuliani is wrapped up in a ton of BS, and it will be hard to compare what he's doing to like previous back channels. So like how we've talked a little bit about how other back channels have been promoting U.S. policy in the past. So I wanted to give some examples of that. So like you mentioned FDR with Harry, what's his face? Harry Hopkins. Harry Hopkins. So one of the things he did was he went to Winston Churchill and and FDR wanted him to determine Britain's willingness to fight Adolf Hitler in like 1940. So he went over there and the report was good. He said, the British are willing to take on Hitler and they can be a trusted ally in this fight. he was also used to go to the Soviets. It's the same thing as what's their willingness to take on the Third Reich. So that's obviously in the promotion of U.S. policy, right? It had nothing to do with nothing to do with FDR himself. FDR wasn't gaining monetary gain or reputation or anything like that. It was or political gain. It was solely that the United States can understand where their potential allies were in the coming war against Adolf Hitler. Kissinger, is definitely a controversial figure, but he was trying to establish back channels with, like you said, China and Russia. This is during the Cold War. Attempts at cooling the Cold War would be definitely in the realm of promoting U.S. policy. So it's very clear that these past things are in the promotion of the overall United States policy and standing in the world. I just wanted to give some specific examples of that since we mentioned it. And then now today with Giuliani, it just doesn't seem like that. It seems like the argument some have made is that Trump and Giuliani are just going against corruption in Ukraine, which would benefit the United States foreign policy in that area. I would say if that was true, then I would buy that. But I just don't buy that Trump and Giuliani are against corruption when pretty much their rap sheet is full of corruption, and they're trying to oust the least corrupt person, Yovanovitch, from the scenario. So I just don't buy that the narrative that this is against corruption in Ukraine. We mentioned that last week, and so it just doesn't line up with this back channel's purpose.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the context is interesting, because I think both in the FDR administration and in the Nixon administration, what you highlighted, it shines light on the point at hand, is that I think you summed it up well when you said this wasn't to further FDR or Nixon's personal gains. The actions of these diplomats overseas was truly meant to further some agenda or goal with the U.S. government. And you can obviously argue if these agendas were good or bad, but there was a reason for them that was not on the personal level,
right.
And I think so that the big question I have kind of involving with Rudy Giuliani, Trump, the State Department, and just kind of this whole investigation and inquiry right now is how much does the State Department know, and what was the State Department's role in this? And unfortunately, it's really hard to get a lot of answers because we're not hearing from Mike Pompeo at the top. But to me, I think that is what we truly need to know was what Giuliani was doing on his own will. Was he doing this out of personal financial interests? Was this for his consulting company? Or was it actually policy that Trump and Pompeo, potentially Pence and Bolton all knew about, and it was all working together for quote unquote the U.S. government? And I think that's the big question to me is was this working on a bigger policy, or was Giuliani just being careless?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think the likelihood is that it was more of a cabal and a conspiracy over Giuliani just being Giuliani?
I would actually probably pretty unlikely for me. I don't think it's this big, Watergate level conspiracy about pretty much pay to play in the form of blackmailing the Bidens and investigating the Bidens. I truly think that Giuliani has gotten a little careless. He went from America's mayor to kind of Ukraine's investigator, Ukraine's money. And I personally think that it's going to be really hard to totally connect Trump with Giuliani in this. And I think that you kind of have to wonder, was this back channel diplomacy, or unfortunately Rudy Giuliani as an individual taking advantage of his connections to the president?
I have a feeling that you're kind of right, that it's not like this huge, like it's not like they all sat in a room and decided everything. I do think though that Trump and Giuliani are pretty well connected, and I think everyone else was just taken along for the ride. Like my gut feeling is like, because we know that John Bolton doesn't like Rudy Giuliani, and John Bolton, thought that he called it a drug deal, what was happening with Ukraine. He didn't want to be any part of it. I have a feeling that a lot of these high State Department and other administration, like that high level, Trump was probably like, you need to work with Rudy, and I got Rudy on it, and they were like, oh crap, like I don't even know, like Rudy's on this, good God. And it was kind of the thing of like, what's going on with Rudy? He'll handle it. Rudy will handle the Yovanovitch thing, and they didn't really know what was up. It's obvious that Mike Pompeo kind of didn't do anything to support Maria Yovanovitch, because Yovanovitch knew she was getting ousted. She said, I was warned to watch my back, and she didn't find any solace or help from headquarters back in the United States. So I'm not sure. I don't know if that's Mike Pompeo actively knowing what's going on or just being told by Trump, "Don't worry about it. Giuliani will handle it." I do have a feeling though that, um, you know, I have a feeling that Giuliani and Trump are connected. I don't know if Trump told him exactly what to do. If it was just kind of like help me get dirt on the Bidens, and Giuliani took it from there. But I have a feeling that kind of like the Mueller report. I think Trump will get out of this fine, but I think Giuliani's in big trouble.
Yeah, that's completely accurate. I think to me, Giuliani seems to be the sequel's leading actor as Michael Cohen, part two.
Yeah.
Like I mean, unfortunately, he seems more careless than Michael Cohen, but he seems like someone who's been wrapped up in this either willingly or unwillingly, and is probably going to take the sword. He's probably going to fall on the grenade with this one.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think you do bring up an interesting question: is how many people knew in this? Was it just Trump and Giuliani, and did Pompeo kind of go along, or was he in on it? And I personally probably think he just went along, because to me, unfortunately, he seems like the worst thing for a person like Trump. He's a yes man.
Yeah.
He's just kind of has pretty much that MAGA stamp just stamped on his forehead at all times. And I think even if Rex Tillerson, the previous Secretary of State, was bad and unequipped to do the job, at least he seemed to have his own mindset and was able to say no to Trump. But Mike Pompeo just seems like somewhat of a hack to me. And so I would not be surprised if maybe he didn't instigate this, but he was pulled into it and went along. And that could be the interesting tale of this impeachment inquiry, is who went along, because I don't think all these people could be easily tied to having the intent, but who knows if they went along or not willingly.
Right, or they might not have had the full story. They might have just been told we have a back channel handling things in Ukraine, and they're like, okay.
Okay.
Well, that's what you could see. What happened with the people that did testify was like, it's over time they kind of slowly figured out, wait a minute, are we doing a quid pro quo? Like the one guy in the text was like, are you telling me that we're trading a White House meeting for information on Biden's? And they're like, call me, right? I think over time a lot of these people started to realize what was happening a little bit too late, but they all thought they were promoting U.S. policy, and over time they slowly realized they were promoting Trump's interests, and then most of that was being held or at the helm of this operation was Rudy Giuliani. So yeah, I think we already nailed it. That I think Giuliani is screwed. I think he's gonna go the way of Michael Flynn and Michael Cohen and Roger Stone and all those guys.
That's a good point.
But from what we've seen in the past, I think Trump will get out of this fine, which is interesting. We'll see how much it affects his electability, if at all. But yeah, it does look like Rudy Giuliani is one of the sloppiest back channels in U.S. history.
Yes, he is. And I actually think in some ways it could discredit the impeachment inquiry that the Democrats are running, to be honest, because if the tale that I've got out of these impeachment hearings so far from, people such as Yovanovitch and even Sunland was that, like you said, it sounded like they kind of got filled in as it went, as it unfolded. And I almost think that discredits this idea of an impeachable conspiracy inside the White House, because it almost kind of like what you were saying is it kind of seems like Giuliani was doing some careless activities in Ukraine that were probably illegal. And either Trump was in on it or just didn't really care. And I think that discredits the idea of a conspiracy. And so it could be interesting to see if that really hurts Trump too much going forward. Like you said, I think Giuliani's going to get in trouble. And who knows? I mean, maybe even Pompeo or other higher-ranking State Department officials. But I see Trump getting out unscathed as well.
I just think it's like, I think in order to answer that question of how much of this was a conspiracy and how much of it was Giuliani just being Giuliani, is we'd have to know more. We'd have to hear from Giuliani and Trump and Pompeo, but that's not going to happen. I mean, the public part of the hearings are already over. A lot of people ignored subpoenas. So I just think it's unfortunate that I don't think we have the full story. And so we won't ever have the full story. And it's hard to hammer down an impeachment offense if no one knows the full story and no one else is willing to give the full story.
Yeah.
Like it would have to be the kind of thing that Giuliani gets, arrested and his phone records get, obtained, and then you see the connections. But until that happens, we just don't know. We just don't know. The thing we do know though is we both agree that Giuliani is is sloppy, and he's really gone downhill from his past reputation. It's almost such a like outside of everything we just talked about. Like it's also just crazy to go from like on top, like America's mayor, like you said, to now like the crazy uncle that just spews things on Thanksgiving and drops his phone. Like it's like, dude, holy crap.
Yeah, a lot has changed with Giuliani. I mean, I'll actually never forget after, let's see, I think it was Obama's second election victory over Romney. Giuliani was on Fox News. I think he was talking to Hannity or O'Reilly at the time or something, and he was basically like, "We need to become more moderate. The Republican Party needs to reshape our view, and in 2016, come out and, try to be more inclusive." He's like, "We need to adopt the libertarian view in some of our areas." And then flash forward 4 or 5 years, you have Giuliani with orange hair on Fox News, literally showing like emails that probably could be subpoenaed,
Yeah.
and it's just insane. It is interesting. I mean, he's a character. I really want to see him testify. To be honest, like I was
Oh,
telling you, I'd take the day off for it.
yeah. I'd grab popcorn. I'd get a big foam number 1 hand. I'd get ready for it. It'd be an event. It would be an
I,
event.
I really quick want to touch on something you brought up earlier that I wrote down to get back to later was Kushner, and I've been kind of looking into the Logan Act a little bit, which talks about it was a legislation enacted by the Congress in 1799 that forbids private citizens from engaging in unauthorized correspondence with foreign governments. And it's interesting because they brought this up a lot with Jared Kushner's role in kind of doing somewhat of shadow diplomacy. He's worked with the Saudis. He's been trying to broker the Israel-Palestine issue. He was talking to Mexico about the wall earlier. And a lot of people are bringing up the Logan Act, saying that this is a private citizen acting unauthorized correspondence with other governments. And I just want to ask you what you think this line is between back channel democracy and violating the Logan Act. Because I mean, like I talked about earlier, I mean, Robert Kennedy, when JFK was president, was doing similar things, and people seem to be maybe less aware of it, but also okay with it as time has gone on. And it's interesting to note that the Logan Act has actually never convicted anybody.
That's interesting. It does not. It doesn't. It does seem like the Logan Act doesn't really have much teeth. I also think the specific specifications of what's going on are important. Like Robert Kennedy wasn't going on his own accord. He was probably told by JFK to go do this, right? It was at the direction of the president. And again, with U.S. interests involved. So Jared Kushner, I have to imagine, did it at the direction of Trump, right? Go talk to the Russians, go talk to the Saudis, and about whatever. I don't think I have a hunch that it wasn't as noble of a thing as trying to quell a Cuban Missile Crisis. But we don't know. We don't know for sure. So I'm not. I don't know. It could have been good for the U.S. Could have been bad. But it does look like he was directed by the president, which would then classify it as a back channel. And like you said, if no one's ever been convicted underneath using the Logan Act, it doesn't really seem like it has much teeth as a law.
No.
Perhaps Giuliani will be the first, because it could be the kind of thing where he's doing all these deals with foreign governments to get more money in his pocket, and maybe that wasn't at the direction of Trump, and that would fall under the Logan Act. But it's interesting because
That's a good point.
yeah, because before we had decided to do some research on this and talk about it, I had not even heard of the Logan Act either. So it is interesting that it's a thing that is rarely used against people.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kushner. The thing with Kushner is just the fact that his father and the whole Trump family has so many business dealings, or had so many business dealings in Russia and Saudi Arabia, and that's where he was setting up the back channels. That just was sketchy to me.
Yeah.
But so we don't know exactly what he was talking about. But we do have evidence now that Rudy Giuliani was definitely not acting in the interest of the United States as a whole. And so that would definitely be a foul back channel.
Right, right. And yeah, I want to just say one more thing on the Logan Act while we were on it. Was that is interesting to me because I was looking up the history of it, and it's kind of been argued that the Logan Act is only used as a political tool, not as a legal tool, because basically no one really used it or even mentioned it during the 19th century, and even during the Gilded Age, when there's a lot of growth in industry and business. There was still no use or really recognition of the Logan Act. It was only in the 20th century when each party started calling out the other for violating it. And so a lot of people are worried that this is just going to be a talking point on both sides during this impeachment inquiry and in, talking about the Kushners and everyone else's, because it really only seems to come up when you're blaming the other side for going out of their reach of what they can do acting unauthorized, and so I think it does seem like it would not be a good argument, especially since no one's ever been convicted of it either.
Yeah, it seems like the Logan Act also came at a time when the federal government in the United States wasn't that strong. In 1799, most people still identified more with states, and states and states were acting on their own. And so I can see how the Logan Act at the time was more just a symbolic way to be like, look, if we have beef with, England or France or whatever, we don't want states or private actors or businesses, doing deals behind like the federal government's back. And it's just, since then it just hasn't really been something that's been utilized a lot. But I can definitely see it as being more of a symbolic thing or a political thing than necessarily an actual law that's enacted.
Yeah, that's a good take. That's a good take for sure. It's going to be interesting. I think what truly worries me is I don't give too much of a damn about the use of a back channel, especially because it's so hard to prove that it wasn't used, like at least by the administration, to further some policy. What scares me more is just these testimonies, especially from Yovanovitch, where they just talk about how depleted and demoralized the State Department is. That's
Right.
that's for me the bigger fear is that democracy, like especially a country like the United States, we need a strong foreign service, especially with our military, leaving and trying to pull out of a lot of Europe and the Middle East. We need a strong State Department, and I mean, back channels or not, it just seems like there's a lack of character and kind of a lack of leadership.
Yeah, well, it also just worries me when you have like career administrative people, right, like Yovanovitch and whatever, that are like you said, like they're so demoralized, and in reality, the person that's doing all the back channeling is someone that's completely inexperienced and easily manipulated. Like you said, like if Rudy Giuliani has money problems, which he, we now know he has, then if someone has money problems, then they're easily manipulated. They're vulnerable, and they could be given bad information. And so, the president is now getting it has entrusted someone that's getting bad information, easily manipulated, and so therefore himself then, without even realizing it, is then manipulated by foreign governments. Whereas you have these career diplomats and ambassadors that are way less susceptible to being manipulated like that and can understand things and don't have any, they're not out of money. They work for the State Department. That's not even a concern, right? They're not there for the money, and they don't have to worry about money. So like, yeah, it's just now you just have diplomacy being in the hands of someone that's super vulnerable compared to people that are like lifetime ambassadors, and now they're getting ousted. It's worrisome, right? It's worrisome. Whereas the previous back channels, like it almost seems like previous back channels were supposed to like supplement the regular administrative stuff, whereas this seems to be to subvert it.
It's a very, very good synopsis of that. I completely agree. And I think that's the difference. Is in the past it was about representing the president or the State Department, even if it was unofficial.
Uh-huh.
And you're right. With Rudy Giuliani, it seems to be more about personal issues, maybe with money. And I don't think that's a good way to be conducting foreign affairs. And obviously, it's not going to be better for Ukraine or the United States,
No.
because it seems to be individual necessity and run by money. And I mean, Robert Kennedy is JFK's brother, and obviously there's some allegiance to one another, but that he wasn't befriending Russians for personal gain. It was so if they needed it, he could call them to the table and say, hey, look, um, you know, our two leaders can't talk, but maybe we can in this room because we've developed a relationship.
Right. Right. Well, if you look at the result, right? Like now that we're at this point with the impeachment hearings and all this information out, I have to imagine that our relationship with Ukraine has been strained, right? Our on the table non-back channel, our face-to-face public relationship between the United States and Ukraine has to have taken a hit because of all this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm sure the Ukrainian president and the people are not happy about it, just like we aren't.
It's true.
So it's almost like even if the point was to promote better relationships with the United States and Ukraine, that has failed.
Yeah. Yeah, and the sad thing is the elephant in the room is still there, is that Ukraine was trying to make an effort at stopping corruption, and they have some serious corruption issues still. I mean, we talked about it a few weeks ago where corruption is in the decline in Ukraine, but they have a civil war in a region of the country. They have strong issues with Russia right now, and they have extremely corrupt oligarchs running a large amount of their companies. And so this is not a time to turn this into a political game in the United States. Like, there are serious issues, and isolating ourselves from Ukraine now and all these conspiracies, between Russian or Ukrainian hacking, it's just insane. It's just truly insane.
And it seems like Rudy Giuliani has done nothing but make it all worse.
I agree. I agree. I can't wait to see him on TV again. I have to say, he is pretty damn funny.
Oh well, yeah, that's right. He's been kind of silent because he's lawyered up. He lawyered up, and now he's not going on Fox as much anymore.
Yeah. The one funny thing though about Giuliani is that he did tweet that I guess he has an insurance policy against Trump speaking out against him. So I do not know what that means, but Giuliani said that if I disappear, I'm going to release my insurance.
Okay. All right, Rudy, whatever you say, bro.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
To live one day in his shoes, what the things you would think and the things you would see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts on this?
No, other than I would love to see Rudy Giuliani testify.
There we go. We can agree on that.
Yeah, because that would just be fun. That would just be good old fun. No, other than that, I think we kind of covered it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Like usual, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and I'm seeing that we're showing up on a lot of small third-party podcast sites as well. So it pretty much sounds like we're everywhere you could need to find podcasts.
And if you want to set up a back channel, feel free to DM us on Instagram.
Please do, but make sure it's not for money. We don't do the money thing.
Yeah, only promote U.S. interests, please. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, take care,
Have a good
everyone.
weekend, guys. Bye.